Good afternoon. This is Nicolas, Bornozis, President of Capital Inc. I am delighted that today we're hosting the second annual Capital Inc. Hong Kong Maritime Forum. Given the circumstances, unfortunately, we cannot be in Hong Kong with you physically. However, modern technology gives us the opportunity to be together digitally. And also, it gives us the opportunity to open up this forum to the global maritime community. I would like to thank the Hong Kong Maritime and Port Board, the Invest Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, and of course, the Secretary for Housing and Transport for being our keynote speaker. And a tremendous thanks to the whole Hong Kong maritime community for embracing and supporting our forum in such a tremendous way. The theme of today's forum is Hong Kong Global Industry and Thought Leadership, Building on Tradition and Innovation. Well, Hong Kong has been a leading global maritime hub, and the Hong Kong maritime community has been one of the leading contributors to the global shipping industry. Thus, the theme of global industry and thought leadership is perfectly fitting. Hong Kong ship owners have gone through amazing challenges and transformation over the years. Resilience, flexibility, adaptability, and a rich industry heritage underpin the Hong Kong maritime community. So the theme of building on tradition and innovation is perfectly fitting. In line with the above, our forum today presents the Hong Kong maritime leadership, addressing a global audience. And we're pleased to see that the vast majority of our delegates are from the international shipping community. We are starting with a unique session, our forum. And the first session of our forum is Hong Kong's maritime community looking through the hourglass, a journey in time. And indeed, we are going to have a travel through time, looking back before we look forward, taking stock of how Hong Kong came to the present point, how and why it has become a major international shipping center, and what lessons we can take from the past for the future. For this unique session, we have 4 major industry participants who have lived through and actively contributed to the development of Hong Kong over the years. We have King Chow, Kenneth, Richard Hext, and Tim Huxley. I would like to thank Hing in particular because I first broached the idea to him and he warmly espoused it and he helped put this panel together. And of course, I would like to thank Kenneth, Richard, and Tim for their amazing insight and contribution to the development of this session. Special also thanks to Tim Huxley. Tim has put together an amazing and unique presentation, very rich in material, that will show us the development of Hong Kong from 1945 to today. I think that's a kind of a first presentation. It's unique, and without any further delay, I would like to start with the presentation. So let us show you the presentation.
Welcome to Hong Kong. As one of the world's great cities, Hong Kong has always been a favourite place to live or visit. For those of us in the shipping industry, Hong Kong is even more special, as the shipping industry and its many great personalities have played a pivotal role in the city's development. Hong Kong's early establishment was founded on its position as the best deep water anchorage on the South China coast. But it is in the past 75 years, since the end of World War II, that Hong Kong has emerged as a major global shipping centre. For Hong Kong, the Second World War ended on August the 15th, 1945, with the Japanese surrender. The city lay in ruins. The strategically important Taikoo dockyards and Whampoa docks, which prior to the war had been amongst the busiest shipbuilders in Asia, were extensively damaged from intensive bombing by Japanese and Allied forces. and there were over 230 wrecked ships scattered throughout the harbour. When Charles Roberts, the taipan of Butterfield and Swire, the forerunner of today's Swire Group, who controlled the Taikoo dockyards, sent a letter to his headquarters in London saying, "B&S are back in business," it reflected the can-do attitude of Hong Kong companies and a determination to get the city back on its feet. It took a mere 10 months to get the harbour back to being fully operational and 2 years to clear all the wrecks. But 4 years later, after the end of the war, Hong Kong underwent an event that defined the future of the then British colony and laid the foundations for the modern shipping industry. The turmoil prompted by the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949 saw a mass exodus of people from China. Amongst them were many of the wealthy merchant class from Shanghai and Ningbo. Many sought refuge in Hong Kong, which saw a huge dramatic increase in its population during this period. Initially, many of these migrants had hoped that their move would be temporary and that they would soon be able to return to Shanghai. T.Y. Chow, who went on to found Wah Kwong in 1952, sailed down from Shanghai on the steamship Kwok Sing, in which he had a 50% share, telling his young family that they were going on holiday to Hong Kong. Frank Tsao, who later established Great Southern Steamship, the forerunner of international maritime carriers, felt that Hong Kong was lagging far behind Shanghai in both appearance and development, and had every intention of returning home as soon as conditions would allow. But as he wrote in his memoir, "I did not foresee that conditions in China would be turbulent for such a long time to come. In the end, we lost everything we had built up in the mainland." It's hardly surprising that, having had to leave behind their businesses and homes in Shanghai, and with an uncertain future ahead, that shipping was an attractive industry for some of the recently arrived migrants. T.Y. Chow once told his son George, "The good thing about being in the shipping business is that you can pack up, get on a ship and leave anytime you want." For many of the newly arrived migrants, the Korean War greatly helped their trading and shipping businesses. Sanctions imposed on China meant there was a huge demand for a wide range of manufactured goods and raw materials, and the Shanghai diaspora reacted to the call for help from their compatriots, with much trade being diverted through nearby Macau, which, being a Portuguese enclave, was exempt from sanctions. With both the Korean War and the rebuilding of Japan providing high demand for shipping, the youthful Hong Kong shipping companies began to grow. Many of their initial deals involved participation amongst Shanghai migrants, many of whom had been friends and business partners before they had moved to Hong Kong. T.Y. Chow's first venture into shipping in Hong Kong was in partnership with D.L. Wu and George Cheng, the success of which allowed the partners to set up their own companies, respectively Wah Kwong, Thai Ship, and Ping An Steamship. Shanghai connections and friendships also allowed the Koo family to build their shipping business in Hong Kong. The bulk carrier Ramona, subsequently named Valles after the Koo family's new company, was acquired for US dollars 105,060, thanks to CS Koo obtaining a loan from Wheelock Marden. CS Koo's winning bid was a mere $60 more than the second bidder. It was in 1955 that another Shanghai emigre, Y.K. Pao, started worldwide shipping. Pao had been a banker in Shanghai, but was unable to pursue that career in Hong Kong, and so subsequently established an import-export business. When he branched into shipping, his first vessel was the Golden Alpha, which was a 27-year-old coal-fired 8,000-ton bulk carrier. Within 25 years, the worldwide brand had expanded to over 200 ships, the largest privately owned fleet ever assembled. The early acquisitions of the Hong Kong ship owners were all second-hand ships. Y.K. Pao's Golden Alpha was just one example, whilst Wah Kwong was one of many ship owners to snap up more surplus ships with the purchase of the King David, which had been built in 1941 by the UK government as a troop carrier and was subsequently named Hong Kong Venture. Frank Tsao's first ship, the Ebenol, was built in 1908, 17 years before the birth of the great man himself. The 1960s was the decade when Japan emerged from the ravages of war to become an economic powerhouse, and the demand for shipping raw materials to Japan's industrial machine and to then export the goods manufactured meant there was healthy demand for shipping. This was seen as a golden age for Hong Kong ship owners, who pioneered the Shikumisan scheme, whereby ships were built in Japan and chartered to Japanese charterers on long-term agreements. With the backing of these long-term charters, Hong Kong ship owners were able to secure finance for their new orders and build up a stable, recurrent income stream, which allowed them to further expand their fleets. For the Japanese, this allowed the growth of their shipbuilding industry, and with Hong Kong owners having much lower operating costs than Japanese owners, who were obliged to use Japanese crews, everyone was a winner. The stable income stream, which avoided the peaks and troughs of the spot market, was not for everyone, though, and some Greek owners criticised the likes of YK Pao for adopting a banker's mentality, which is hardly surprising considering his banking career in Shanghai. Clearly, the Hong Kong approach worked. By 1976, Pao's worldwide shipping controlled a fleet bigger than the combined fleets of Greek titans Onassis, Niarchos, and Lemos, prompting Newsweek magazine to proclaim YK Pao king of the sea. Equally prominent as the exploits of YK Pao were those of fellow Shanghai emigre C.Y. Tung, who had arrived in Hong Kong in 1948. Tung built a diverse fleet under the banner of island navigation, and they were the first Hong Kong owner of container ships, with the formation of Orient Overseas Container Lines in 1969. In 1970, Tung's container ship, the Ge Yung, was the first Chinese full container ship to cross the Pacific, whilst the addition to the Tung fleet in 1979 of the tanker Seawise Giant, which had over 550,000 deadweight, was the largest vessel ever built, marked the peak of Hong Kong's ascendancy as one of the centres of global shipowning. As they increased their influence in shipping, Hong Kong's leading shipowners also took a prominent role on the global stage. YK Pao's impeccable contacts with world leaders saw him have open access to the corridors of power, allowing him to play a role as trusted advisor to both Chinese paramount leader Deng Xiaoping and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the negotiations regarding the handover of Hong Kong. C.Y. Tung was also prominent on the world stage, and his belief in the value of education saw thousands of students attend the C.Y.'s University, his floating campus which travelled the world. In 1997, shortly before the handover, George Chow of Hua Kwong, with endorsement of the Chinese government, led discussions and reached agreement with the Taiwan Strait Exchange Foundation over shipping matters between Taiwan and the new Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Whilst the 1970s had been a period of substantial growth for the Hong Kong shipowners, the world was entering a recession which was to hit shipping particularly hard. The signs were there in the late 70s. In 1977, the global tanker fleet grew to 350 million deadweight, but demand was only at 250 million tons. With oil prices peaking in 1979, there was a belief that alternative energy sources would be needed and that coal was the fuel of the future. This prompted a huge wave of bulk carriers to be ordered, and with the tanker market in a downturn, the stage was set for the recession that changed the face of Hong Kong shipping. It was not only the decline of the tanker market and the huge bulk carrier order book that hurt. In 1979, the restrictions previously placed on Japanese shipping were lifted, bringing to an end the Shikumisan deals that had been of such benefit to so many Hong Kong owners. High interest rates and the appreciation of the Japanese yen, the currency in which many ships had been ordered, also added to the owners' woes. When some charterers began to default on their payments, Hong Kong shipowners were plunged into crisis. Whilst YK Pao's worldwide shipping had foreseen the impending crisis and conducted a major sell-off of shipping assets, disposing of 140 ships between 1982 to 1987, others were forced to undergo painful restructuring with their financiers, or even disappeared altogether. Whilst there is no denying the pain this period caused, it also saw opportunities which Hong Kong shipping was more than ready to seize. The repossession of ships by mortgagees saw a need for skilled ship managers and provided a boost to the burgeoning third-party ship management industry in Hong Kong. Wallam Group had been one of the pioneers in providing this service, and they were soon joined by others. Today, Hong Kong is the global leader in ship management and home to several of the world's largest ship management companies, with a technical operation of hundreds of ships for all around the world being overseen from Hong Kong. The recession of the 80s also produced new opportunities for Hong Kong ship owners. In 1987, two young Hong Kong-based British businessmen, Chris Buttery and Paul Over, saw the drop in ship values as a great buying opportunity and established Pacific Basin Shipping. Today, the company has grown to be the world's leading owner and operator of handy-sized bulk carriers, controlling a fleet of over 200 ships. During this period, Hong Kong's port changed dramatically. In the late 60s, the advent of containerization not only saw the birth of Hong Kong's leading container line, OOCL, but also fundamentally changed the nature of the port. The original go-downs and wharves of the inner harbour made way for the giant container terminals at Kwai Chung. Between 1972 and 2012, Hong Kong's port expanded 18 times its original size, as China's growing manufacturers used Hong Kong to export their goods to the world. Whilst the growth of other ports in the Pearl River Delta has seen Hong Kong lose the crown of world #1, Hong Kong is still an essential gateway to the world for exports from southern China. The 90s was a period of consolidation for the Hong Kong shipping community after the trials of the 80s. But one thing that was beginning to preoccupy minds was the impending return of sovereignty over Hong Kong to mainland China on June the 30th, 1997. Whilst there was some trepidation regarding the handover, some saw it as an opportunity. When leading London shipbroker Clarksons acquired a company in Hong Kong in 1987, the chairman replied to a question asking, "What will happen in 1997?" with the response, "We will have an office in the best connected city in China." As it transpired, the handover went ahead smoothly, with no noticeable change in the way Hong Kong shipping went about its business. Indeed, reforms to the Hong Kong Shipping Registry saw the Hong Kong-controlled fleet grow to become the 4th largest in the world. As the new millennium dawned, it was clear that the fortunes of Hong Kong and the ship owners were increasingly linked to the development of China. China's ascension to the World Trade Organization in 2001 set in motion 2 decades of growth as the People's Republic became the world's 2nd largest economy. The demand for commodities to fuel China's growth saw shipping rates hit record levels, and Hong Kong ship owners benefited, although the caution instilled by the memories of the 80s ensured that they were increasingly careful with their counterparties. Hong Kong's shipping community reinvented itself again during this period, with the city becoming the hub for much of the sourcing and commercial management of cargoes moving into China. Many major charterers chose to base themselves in Hong Kong, meaning other service industries such as trade finance, shipbroking, and legal services thrived. China's shipbuilding industry boomed during this period as it rose to challenge South Korea as the world's 2nd largest shipbuilding nation. Hong Kong owners had been pioneers in ordering ships in China, dating back to the 1980s, when the industry was in its infancy. As global demand for ships grew and new building berths were in short supply, the loyalty and commitment that Hong Kong owners had shown to the Chinese shipbuilding industry in its early years were rewarded, with the Chinese shipbuilders showing a distinct preference to take orders from Hong Kong owners. The post-handover period also saw the growth of mainland Chinese shipping companies using Hong Kong as a base. For many years, the Hong Kong offices of mainland firms such as Yik Fung and Ocean Tramping, which in 1995 became COSCO Hong Kong, together with the China Merchants Group, were the main conduit for the acquisition of second-hand ships for China's own merchant marine. They were now joined by other companies with strong mainland ties, whose arrival subtly changed the landscape of Hong Kong shipping, but showed that a reduction in Hong Kong's attraction for shipping companies post-handover was unfounded. The global financial crisis of 2008 put the brakes on the record earnings that had been achieved for the early part of the decade, with the Baltic Dry Index collapsing from 11,793 to 663 in the space of just 6 months. Whilst markets improved in 2009 on the back of a stimulus package by the Chinese government, the damage to the shipping industry had been done for years to come on the back of a massive over-ordering of new tonnage in the boom years. For the Hong Kong owners, this was a storm that was braved reasonably well. Resisting the temptation to order too many ships, being careful with counterparties, and displaying their renowned skills in market timing served them well. For example, Wah Kwong called the top of the market with a sale of a 3-year-old bulk carrier at $76.5 million, more than 3 times the price it had cost to build, and which was handed over to the new owners mere days before the collapse of Lehman Brothers precipitated the financial crisis. Having experienced so many peaks and troughs since the end of the Second World War, what does the future hold for Hong Kong's shipping community? Hong Kong's obituary has been written many times, but still it bounces back. And as a former governor once said, never bet against Hong Kong. The number of ship owners may be less than its 70s heyday, and several companies have relocated away from Hong Kong. But the Hong Kong shipping industry remains in good health, with the 3rd and 4th generations of the original Shanghai migrants now taking over many of the established names. Ship management continues to be a rapidly growing business, with Hong Kong's geographic advantage of being close to China and less than 4 hours from almost anywhere else in Asia, making this the best possible location from which to offer such services. Other shipping services, notably ship leasing, continue to thrive, but Hong Kong's biggest opportunity for the future involves embracing the opportunities afforded by the Greater Bay Area. The area encompassing the special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau, together with 9 municipalities in Guangzhou, has been earmarked by the Chinese government to lead innovation and development and work together to lead China's technological advancement. Serving a population of over 72 million and with a commitment to closer integration whilst leveraging the advantages of the various component cities, the Greater Bay Area offers a growing, increasingly affluent local market for Hong Kong's established skills, and with a population larger than that of South Korea. Hong Kong remains one of the world's great cities and great maritime centres, and looking at how it has overcome the challenges of the past make us confident for the future. We look forward to welcoming you here soon.
Well, Tim, this has been an amazing presentation, and I would like to thank you very much for putting it together. I think it's a unique presentation, and I think it's a kind of a first one. So thank you very much. We're waiting for Kenneth now to join us, and here he is. And I'd like to thank you all for putting this together, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nicolas, and hello to everybody, and welcome to the first discussion panel of today. As you know, I'm joined by 3 leading figures from Hong Kong shipping community, namely Kenneth Koo, the Group Chairman of TCC, Hing Chow, the Executive Chairman of Wah Kwong Maritime Transport Holdings, and Richard Hext, the Chairman of Vanmar Shipping and the Chairman of the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. Now, we've just had a brief history of the development of the Hong Kong shipping industry post-war and touched on some of the trials and tribulations of the past that the industry has endured. Turning to Kenneth and Hing first, as the leaders of 2 of our historic ship owners, does that legacy of the past influence the way you run your companies today? And have you ever felt that the past hampers growth and maybe risk-taking? Kenneth.
Well, Tim, first of all, today is a very special day for me. And it's great that for some reason, a great coincidence that Capital Link is being, the event is being held today also. Exactly 37 years ago today on December 1st was the first day I joined the family business. And you know, this really gave me that opportunity to reflect back. I think I was very fortunate because I was able to enter the industry when a lot of the patriarchs, the shipping patriarchs of Hong Kong that you talked about, they were basically, you know, at their peak or at their prime, so to speak. So being able to learn under them, interact with them, actually in many ways shaped the way I actually, that I'm actually leading the company today, or continuing what has been continued for the last 4 generations. What I feel was one of the biggest takeaways that I've had over the last 37 years on the Hong Kong shipping industry is the fact that, number one, nothing phases us. You know, we were not shaped by a couple of shipping slumps. You know, basically, we all know your excellent presentation mentioned that. You know, the first generations went through some extremely seismic and traumatic events. So it was really, and I think that what that really did was it fostered and developed the qualities of reliability, respect, and trust, and that in turn came from the need during those days of turmoil for the whole industry to get together and help each other out. So when let's say my grandfather used to talk to me, I was in my early teens already, about being reliable, being trustworthy and all that, he wasn't just talking about how do we brand ourselves. In his days, I remember him saying that that was the difference between surviving and not surviving. That was the difference between life and death. That carried on to the second generation in form of a lot of the business dealings that was being done. Well, you mentioned the Shikumi Sens. A big part of that was indeed forming relationships with our Japanese friends way back in the 60s by helping them out as much as they helped us out. You mentioned the how Hong Kong owners, you know, really was that literally at one point that sole driving force that enabled the Chinese shipping industry to stand where it is today in these lofty heights. That was the same thing. There was that wish to go back to China, help the Chinese shipyards build modern ships, and through Hong Kong owners to promote the ships, promote their products. So there's a lot of that that's going on, and that in turn also created what I call legacy relationships that are so important. So I'm sure there are, you know, you mentioned the Greeks and, you know, our friends in Europe and all that, you know, they're, you know, certainly they have their fair share of legacy relationships. But in, let's say, my formative years, legacy also meant the opportunity to grow up with a lot of the chief executives, chairmen, and, you know, of shipyards, charters and all that, you know, where they are today. I was fortunate to have known several of them when they were production managers in yards or they were assistant chartering managers. I think part of, for me, being able to grow up with them was in and of itself another critical, I would say, a critical event, if you may, that helped mold myself into what I am today. So yes, indeed, I think the legacy continues. And many times when I talk, I say this to my staff a lot. When they hear me talk, I tell them, it's not me talking. It's my father, KH, talking. It's my uncle, KW, talking. And it still resonates very deeply in me.
Hing, do you feel your ancestors standing behind you, and what influence have they got on the way Wah Kwong is today?
I think absolutely. I cannot agree with Kenneth more on two fronts. A is that the camaraderie within the shipping community, as is well known to you and Richard, is extremely strong. Whenever something is happening in the market, we come together, we exchange thoughts. So rather than looking at ourselves or at each other as competitors, we're really part of the same community. And we see as the different companies as friends across many different generations, and really part of a big family. And we oftentimes work together not only to exchange ideas, but we promote the interests of the industry through representation at international level, through sitting on the executive committee of Hong Kong Shipowner Association, but we also explore a lot of commercial opportunities together through joint ventures, etc. Now, speaking more from a Wah Kwong point of view, for me, coming back into the company several years ago, a lot of the things that I went through as a child or when I was growing up sort of come back to my memory very quickly. An astonishing fact, actually, as I ease myself back into the business, is the amount of support, as Kenneth has mentioned, that is not only coming to me from within the company or even from within the family, but indeed legacy relationships, such as, when I was trying to learn more about the company history, I talked to you, I talked to Kenneth, I talked to Uncle Sisi Tong and many other people. And this amount of support I've got is just overwhelming. It's almost as if all the other peers within the shipping industry in Hong Kong want to see me as an individual and want to see Wah Kwong as a company succeed. And indeed, because I'm also a bit of a historian, when I go into the market today to try to do a deal, I also see a lot of repeating patterns in the things that my father has done or what Wah Kwong has been through. And indeed, Hong Kong's position as a gateway, as you have so eloquently put it in your presentation, into China and as a platform connecting China with the rest of the world. Now, circumstances have changed. China plays a much bigger role in global trade and economics than it did 30 years ago, 50 years ago, but the fundamental role of Hong Kong hasn't changed. And I think, by looking back into the past and looking into the ways in which my father, my grandfather, how our ancestors have gone about to overcome and seize opportunities and overcome difficulties, give us a lot of inspiration. And there's a lot to learn from these lessons as we move forward into the future.
Richard, you certainly, I'm sure if you put your mind to it, could have established a huge family business in shipping, but you actually started your career working for a private ship owner, China Navigation, and then you moved to a listed company. So you got both sides of the story. I mean, were there any specific advantages of being based in Hong Kong that stood out for you in both the private and the public sector?
Thank you very much, Tim, also for your excellent film presentation, which was first class. So a slightly unconventional start, I think, to my comments. Hong Kong has got some amazing beaches. It's got some of the best walking trails in the world. It's got fantastically warm weather. It's got beautiful views. We have an amazing range of sports you can do here. It's a cinch to travel out to so many fantastic destinations. I think we've got more restaurants per capita than almost any other city in the world. We've got amazing venues like cinemas and like museums, including, of course, the Hong Kong Maritime Museum, and wonderful warm people. So the point is to start with, Hong Kong as a city to go to is an amazingly attractive city for all sorts of expatriates as well as local people to live. So that's why Hong Kong's a good place to be, because it's 24 hours in a day and it's not all about shipping. But if you look at whether you're a listed or a privately owned shipping company, Hong Kong's got probably more technical expertise than any other city in the world. We have commercial expertise, insurance services, financial expertise, some of the most accountants of any city in China. The people here are incredibly hardworking. They're great friendly colleagues. There's an amazing port here. As we all know, Hong Kong was once the biggest port in the world in terms of containers, but now has spread its expertise to the other ports in the Greater Bay Area. So for any type of shipping company, there's an extraordinary infrastructure to support what you're doing. But then as a listed company in particular, you probably know that Hong Kong in 7 of the last 11 years had more IPO activity than any other stock market in the world. And in terms of the infrastructure for capital markets, whether debt or equity, all the investment banks are here, all the capital raising facility you need, all the big lawyers, whether US or British or European or other law firms are here. So as an infrastructure for a listco, it's also terrific. Tim, does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, Brisbane gives us a pretty good idea, but let's look at somewhere that preceded Hong Kong. Shanghai, that was the origin of much of Hong Kong shipping in the 40s and 50s. And Shanghai has now re-established itself as a maritime center. I mean, are we going to suffer from competition from Shanghai, or is it a totally different market? Or has the pie of China, a China-related business, got so much bigger that our slices has been growing? Kenneth, you were a pioneer up there building green capes, the first owner to order a ship at SWF Shipyard. So, and of course, your family roots go very deep there. Coexistence or competition?
It's coexistence Most definitely, Tim. I over the past few years, I've led a couple of Hong Kong Ship Owners Association delegation, and namely our China subcommittee, specifically to look at collaborative kind of endeavors that we can work with together in Shanghai. One analogy that I always like to use, for those of whether we are Chinese or non-Chinese, if you get into these old classic martial arts movies, the sword fighting, there's often this plot about the search for two magic swords that if they're combined together, it was going to create all kinds of power and what have you. And that's the analogy that I used when we went to see the municipal government and all that. Hong Kong and Shanghai, number one, it's very rare that you have two major international maritime centers. Hong Kong and Shanghai, the latter of which, of course, recently has been ranked amongst the top 10. It's very rare to have one country with two renowned international maritime centers. China's economy, China's growth in terms of ports, in terms of shipping related logistics, and the sheer number of ship owners up and down the coast basically means that you do need that two-headed dragon, to really help China ascend to newer levels of strength, newer levels of influence, whether it's maritime regulatory or shipping. I feel that's so important. And then the other thing is, when you really look at Hong Kong and Shanghai, yes, there are overlaps, but at the same time, they have their own areas of expertise. And you just mentioned about the fact that Hong Kong is going to play indeed a very critical cog in terms of how maritime shipping grows within the greater area. Now, Shanghai's niche obviously is that driving force, that dragon's head in that burgeoning Yangtze River Delta. So when one talks about the Shanghai International Maritime Center, in fact, today it basically means Shanghai, Ningbo, and Zhoushan combined, plus that whole hinterland, that the Yangtze reaches. You can see that, we talk about Cape-sized bulk carriers, they go all the way way past Jiangyin and Zhangjiagang. So both areas I feel have their niches. Where there are common overlaps, I feel that they basically will be addressing their own areas. One thing that we have worked with Shanghai on is, in fact, we about 2 or 3 years ago, we actually established a joint kind of a research endeavor. In the sense that we try to identify each other's strengths and weaknesses, so that there are areas that we can enhance and there's areas that we can lean on each other. The fact that there's also an intention in terms of working with Shanghai, so that one of their maritime days is actually going to be held in Hong Kong. So that relationship is very tight. And then, of course, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, Hong Kong ship owners, for the most part, the traditional ones, do hail from Shanghai. So at the same time, there is a bit of a continuity, a bit of a legacy there also as well. And the fact that we are now, Hong Kong, the traditional owners are here in southern China, it basically means we are actually bringing some of Shanghai's entrepreneurial spirit down here to southern China. So, these are two magic swords. And crossing them together, I am very confident we'll be seeing some wonderful things happen.
Heng, you've taken Hua Kwong, really expanded their business interests in China over the years, training, ship management, everything like that. I mean, do you think Hong Kong shipping has still got a lot to give to the mainland, or is now the mainland so advanced that it's a symbiotic relationship?
I think, first of all, if I can just go back to your previous question, what Kenneth has already gone to some length in answering is that I do not see Hong Kong and Shanghai as necessarily competitors, and I don't increasingly tend to see Shanghai or Hong Kong alone as maritime cities. I think it's much more helpful to look at Shanghai as a center of a very great blossoming and growing maritime cluster, and same with Hong Kong. And if we sort of look at Hong Kong as the center of this maritime cluster, where does it extend to? Well, it extends naturally into the Greater Bay Area. So for example, that will include places like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and all the other municipal areas encompassed under the 9+2 cities within the GBA, with Hong Kong at the very center. So I see the weaving of Hong Kong into the GBA very much as the future for the maritime of the development of the maritime cluster in southern China. And to add to what Kenneth was saying, while I see that in the foreseeable future, Hong Kong and Shanghai, these two maritime clusters will remain the driving force of the development of the ocean economy in China. We mustn't neglect that in the north, there is a third maritime cluster with Qingdao, Dalian, and if you extend further, Beijing as well. And I do not see each of them competing with each other, because I think if you look at China as a major maritime country, if you look at the size of and the variety of shipping activities happening in each of these hubs, there is enough activity to sustain each of their own growth. But indeed, the role for each of them is slightly different, if I can put it in a very, very simplistic terms. Northern China with Beijing in the center is maybe more policy driven. Shanghai would be the most open place and most highly commercially developed shipping center for China. And that is situated very strategically middle China. Hong Kong and the south, we are still a little bit more open with a completely different legal system and with a much more open financial structure, which Shanghai cannot replicate. So I do think that each of us play a different role.
And we're still in Hong Kong, it's still very much sort of gateway to the rest of the world. I mean, you've got, as Richard pointed out earlier, all of the international banks setting up here. It is still easier to set up as an overseas company, to have your headquarters for Greater China based in Hong Kong. I mean, so is Hong Kong's role going to be enhanced in the coming years as China heads inexorably towards being the world's largest economy?
I should very much hope so. Since a couple of years ago, as Kenneth has already mentioned, Hong Kong SOA has been working very closely with our counterparties in China, most particularly with Shanghai, because this is where most of the families come from. So we have a natural affinity, we have natural connection with Shanghai. But recently, since 2 years ago, the SOA, particularly the Hong Kong, the China subcommittee, has now a two-pronged approach, as Kenneth mentioned. So on the one side, under Kenneth, we're looking at Shanghai, and on the other hand, under myself, we're looking at how to extend Hong Kong's competitive advantages to work closer with our counterparties within the GBA. So over the last couple of years, you no doubt are fully informed and very much aware of, we think that there is scope and a need for Hong Kong to extend our human talent resources, our professional knowledge into the GBA, and maybe pioneer in creating a new model for maritime education. I think the advantages of Chinese seafarers, because China has such a strong national policy on important issues such as health, has been made very evident to the rest of the world over the past year or so. And therefore, I think more than it has been for some time, Chinese seafarers are now heavily sought after. And therefore, there is a strong argument, in my view, for extending Chinese educational facilities, but more than that, actually enhancing and upgrading how you go about education. And in the rest of China, because they have to abide by the national curriculum, there is a limit to how much you can drive education reform. Whereas in the GBA area, because of the Hong Kong connection, we can bring a lot of international best practices. We can sort of broker new partnerships with international universities in a way that it will be hard to replicate, even in Shanghai. So that's just one example. Another example, of course, is something that will be talked about, no doubtly, at length later today, It's how to continue Hong Kong's role as a major financial center. Earlier this year, the Hong Kong government has already passed a new leasing bill to encourage ship leasing companies to set up headquarters or operational offices in Hong Kong. And recently, about 2 months ago, BIMCO has pinpointed Hong Kong as a fourth arbitration center in their arbitration clause. So I think these are all evident advantages where Hong Kong can look to extend our advantages into the Greater Bay Area or into China through the Greater Bay Area.
Richard, your career has involved you being involved with both education, technology, as well as good old shipping. I mean, the Greater Bay Area is very much being promoted as a technology development, and that's all the fintech and everything that's going on there. I mean, you know, we're all embracing this very enthusiastically, but shipping, it is actually quite an old industry. I mean, are we going to get left behind, do you think?
I don't think so, Tim. I think Shenzhen is well described as China's Silicon Valley. I think one of the two big megatrends for shipping are probably the decarbonization of shipping, and secondly, the move, I think in a longer term, but a move towards autonomous ships. And we're already seeing examples of the first autonomous ships appearing now in Europe. I think Hong Kong's proximity to the technology centers in the Greater Bay Area will only enhance, if you like, our own potential to do things. And specifically on your point about competition and cooperation and certain cooperation, I think people will sometimes overlook, they talk about different maritime centers in Europe. You've got Oslo, you've got London, you've got Hamburg, and so on. But you know, Europe has a population of 400 million. China has a population of 1.4 billion. And the growth rate in China is significantly greater than in Europe. I think this year, the Eurozone economy is forecast to reduce by about 7 or 8%, sadly, because of COVID. China's is forecast to grow by 2%. So, you know, Hong Kong is in a very fortuitous position. And it's good that we're prodded on by Shenzhen. It's good that we're prodded on by Shanghai. There's plenty to do, and we're on the way to doing it.
Thanks very much. Well, we're coming towards the end of this session. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for it. And I think, you know, you're able to put a pretty positive spin on the whole future prospects of Hong Kong. I mean, just finally, Richard, you've got, as the chairman of the Maritime Museum, I mean, it's preserving our great shipping industry, the history of it, and it's educating locals and visitors alike. As a shipping community, what do we need to do to get more attention to attract both talent and capital to our industry?
Well, I think we've got to keep telling the story, Tim, and perhaps we hide our light a bit under the bushel. I think your presentation was a great start because it puts in context where we are today. So you juxtaposed the success of YK Pow in building the world's largest fleet and then selling, you said, 140 ships in 5 years just before the market turned to toast, which it does from time to time. And you didn't mention, but you know, he went on to reinvest his fortune in property, and no doubt for the time he can come back into shipping. But it's not just YK Pow. We've got two other very prominent ship owners on our call. You mentioned Pacific Basin, that took themselves over 4 years from a market capitalization in 2004 of 300 million up close to 4 billion in 2008. So I think Hong Kong's well equipped to ride those cycles. So in short, we've got to keep telling the story. We've got to keep stressing to our government the importance of investing in the key skill sets that are going to make the ship owners of the future. But I'm quite sure we're going to get there, Tim. And as chief relic of the Hong Kong Maritime Museum, I see that as a key part of my role.
Ping, any last views on the future?
I think there are two sides of looking at it. On the one hand, we have to consider the traditional maritime talent, particularly seafarers. Is Hong Kong going to produce a lot of seafarers in the future? Probably not. Where are they going to come from? Going back to your earlier point, that Hong Kong is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, ship management centers in the world, managing thousands of ships. The answer to that is we can bring in a lot of talent, and we can recruit and train and educate a lot of seafarers just across the border in Shenzhen or elsewhere in the GBA. And by showing career path, planning the career path and reforming education in a well thought out manner, we can actually show people coming into the maritime industry, and that goes back to your point of attracting talent as well, that their career does not end with them becoming a captain, but they can come on shore to become superintendents and maybe eventually even run major shipping companies. So that's on the one side of traditional maritime talent. But going back to the point of innovation, I think, you know, the biggest changes and challenges facing our industry are related to regulations, environmental regulations in particular, but also in terms of digitization. Now, changes often happen times when the scale is relatively small, and a lot of these disruptions are being brought about by startup companies, people who start with a completely fresh perspective on a fresh plate. Hong Kong is extremely well placed as a financial center, and it's an international financial center at that, to incubate and develop and embrace a lot of these changes. So I think Hong Kong can also offer new prospects of career development, career path related to technology. And I think that's something that is yet to be properly explored. But
thank you very much. Well, we've got to draw a line on things now. We've run out of time. Great shame, because we could have gone on for a long time. Heng, Richard, Kenneth, as always, great to talk to you, and thank you very much. Nicolas, back to you.
Well, all I can say is a tremendous thank you. This was an amazing session, and it could not be a better introduction to the forum. So thank you very much to all four of you for an amazing brain power and help.
Thanks so much, Nicolas. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you.
All right.